Welcome. My name's Ron Bielefeld, and I am owner-operator of Whistling Wings Photography. And today I'm going to do a short video on something I'm really excited about, which is this new camera that I got about 2 days ago, the Canon R5. Before I get started, I want to give you a little bit of background. I've been shooting wildlife photography for a long time, specializing really in birds in flight. And for 30 plus years I've shot Canon, right? And then a few years ago Sony came out with a mirrorless camera, the A9, which once I tried it kind of revolutionized things for me, especially the autofocus system on that camera. And so I kind of, at least for a little while up until now, changed to Sony. I sold my Canon bodies, but I kept some Canon lenses, my favorites, hoping that Canon would come along and catch up to Sony, maybe even pass them. So that brings us to the R5, right? Canon's newest mirrorless camera, shooting 20 frames per second like the Sony on an electronic shutter, 12 frames per second on a mechanical shutter. And so, you know, off we go trying the R5. So what I want to go over real quickly with you are the images I've been taking with the R5 have been adapted lenses, okay? With adapted lenses. My 600 f4 with both the 1.4 times teleconverter and the 2 times teleconverter, and believe it or not, my old 400 is 5.6. Doesn't even have IS, right? I don't know how old this lens is, 13 years old. And the reason I did, this is a newer lens, not the Mark III, but it still has image stabilization. It's still just, you know, world class as far as image quality and stabilization and everything else. But then I wanted to try a lens that wasn't stabilized, right? Because for the first time, Canon has IBIS, right? In-body image stabilization in the R5. And so I wanted to see what it would do for an unstabilized lens. And again, I think you're going to be really surprised, and happily so, if you try using some of your older non-stabilized Canon lenses on the R5. And of course, to do that, you have to use one of the adapters that Canon came out with, and they came out with 3, which was kind of neat. This is the one with the control ring on it. There's one where you can basically just a basic adapter that has no control ring, and then they have one that actually has a built-in ND filter and one that has the drop-in filter. So there's 3. But I'm pretty sure the 2 that have the filter capabilities do not have the ring, the control ring. So I got the one with the control ring because who knows, you know, I like to customize things, and I thought that would be great. But for video, I mean, the built-in ND filter, right? I might be getting one of those. Never know. But anyhow, this is basically the setup that I've used. And I also, you know, when I shot the 600, I shot it with a 1.4 times teleconverter on it, and the 2 times, and then naked, just the lens itself. And again, I found that the autofocus and the image quality was outstanding, just outstanding. I believe I was getting, I don't know exactly because I didn't time it or anything at this point, but if I wasn't getting 20 frames per second with these adapted lenses on here on the electronic shutter, I was getting pretty close, because it was filling up the buffer really fast. And so that kind of leads me into one of the points I want to make about the R5 is that, you know, 20 frames per second on the electronic shutter shooting 45 megapixels, right? So it can fill up the buffer on the camera really quickly. And if you hold that shutter button down, you know, for a long burst, it'll fill up fast. And so you know, having the compact flash express card in it really was nice versus the SD card. I kind of tried both of them. The dumping of the buffer was much quicker with the compact flash express card, as you can imagine, because this camera has 2 slots, a compact flash express card slot and an SD card slot. And it's, you know, you can take the really fast SD cards, but those aren't nearly as fast as what the compact flash express can do. Now, I made a mistake when I first took this out. I got this late the night before I was going to do a tour for Swallowtail Kites, And so I didn't have a whole lot of time to set it up. So I basically just put the cards in there, and I didn't even format them. They were brand new cards, but I didn't format them to the camera. And I noticed that the dumping of the buffer of the camera to the compact flash express card was really slow. At least it seemed slow to me. But when I got home, and I got the images off the card, because it recorded to the card just fine. I went ahead and I formatted the card in the camera, right? And that made all the difference in the world. So if you're going to put much quicker. So if you're going to put cards in this camera, make sure, you know, and you want the fastest download or write speeds to the cards, make sure you format them for the camera. It made a huge difference, at least for the compact flash express card. So you will hit a buffer in this camera. This is not like a 1DX Mark II that I was used to. If you put a compact CFast card in there that was fast enough, heck, you could shoot 14 frames per second at 20 megapixels, a lot less, until you filled up the card, right? Never hit a buffer, which was nice. It was really nice, and I was hoping you could do that with this, that was going to be the case, but no, obviously you can't. You will hit a buffer, and when you hit a buffer, you hit a wall, let me tell you. It basically stops shooting. You might go to 1 frame per second, if that. So, but it does dump quickly with the compact flash express card, as long as you, again, format it in the camera. It makes a big difference. So as far as, you know, what I like about the camera, we'll talk about that first. You know, I do mostly birds in flight and other wildlife, and I specialize in action type photography. So to me, you know, the autofocus system, like I already mentioned, is really important. But, you know, ergonomics, you can't get past that. And Sony's ergonomics have gotten better, right? The A9 II, the A7R4, now the A7S III. You know, they've all improved the fit to your hand, I think. The button arrangement, the size of the buttons, the autofocus on button on the Sony now is really big, so you can put gloves on, right? And you can feel it. No problem, find it no problem. I shoot with back button autofocus, I don't shoot with half press. So being able to find the autofocus button on the back of the camera on the R5, it's right here. And but you'll notice it's pretty small, okay? Much smaller than the Sony's. It is, you know, it does come out from the body quite a bit, so you can feel it no problem. I haven't tried it with gloves yet. I live in Florida, and right now, well, heck, right now we're having a tropical storm and it's really hot. And most of the time it's hot here, so I don't wear gloves in Florida very often. Maybe in the winter we might wear a couple days. But I haven't tried it with gloves, but I'm pretty sure I'll probably be able to feel it with gloves. So it shouldn't be too much of a problem. It would have been nice if it was a little bit bigger. As far as the position of the button for my hands, the size of my hands and my thumb, it's almost perfect. So I like that. And I'm not going to go into all of the parts of this camera and things. I'm really just going to focus on, you know, what's important to me and how I shoot. So autofocus and back button autofocus, the autofocus button position is really important. See, I like the feel of this camera. I put the grip on it. I like a little bit heavier and larger cameras to balance larger lenses and things that I use. So that's just a personal preference. So I like it with the grip. You know, there's a lot of talk with this camera about it using batteries like crazy, right? You're going to go through a battery in 300 shots, right? So I'm thinking, well, I'm getting a grip, and I get the grip on most of my cameras if they don't have a built-in one. And so I got the grip, and I put two, what I've been shooting with, though, are the old Canon batteries, like from a 5D Mark IV or something like that, or even a 7D or something. Not even the LPN batteries, it was the older ones even than that, and I put two of those in here, and I basically shot 5,000 images on this camera, long bursts, maybe over 2 hours, and when you look at the battery indicator through the viewfinder or whatever, it had barely gone down 1 dot. So I think as far as battery life goes on this camera and the way I shoot, it's not really going to be a problem. I think it's going to be great, especially with the grip. I don't know if I'd want to go with just the single battery without the grip, because I don't like to have to change batteries, replace batteries, or cards when I'm out shooting. If I'm on a shoot, I don't want to have to think about it. So that's why I kind of set things up the way I do. I also use big cards, 128 or 512 gigabyte cards, so I know I'm not going to run out of space, right? So anyway, that's the way I do it. One thing that's kind of interesting about this camera is the eye cup, right? I think the R was like this too. This eye cup does not come off, okay? So you cannot take this off and put on an aftermarket eye cup, say for if you wear glasses and things like that. At least I can't figure out how it comes off, and so I don't think it comes off. And so if that's a problem for you, you might want to look into that. They may come up with something that will fit around it anyway, but for now, I don't think you can put a third-party eye cup on here if you wear glasses or something like that. So this eye cup isn't bad. I like it actually for me, and I don't wear glasses when I shoot, but some people may, or obviously do, and that may be a problem for them. So, you know, as far as the eye cup, it's kind of interesting that it doesn't come off, right? So that's an interesting development. As far as the dials, though, I love, you know, Canon kind of went like it has with all of its cameras for a long time, is that you've got the dial behind the shutter button, you've got the wheel on the back, and now you've got a dial that's associated with the mode button. And so I've been able to basically set this camera up to where this is my shutter speed, this is my aperture, and this is my ISO. So easily reached and gotten to quickly while I'm shooting. So I really, really like the fact that, you know, all the dials are right there and easily reachable. On the Sony cameras that I've been shooting, like the A9 II for example, the front dial is down here like this, and that is not a natural movement for me. This is much more natural, so I really like the placement of the wheel on the Canon. Personal preference, right? But for me, I love it. So that's, you know, the ergonomics of the camera are great. It's got a tilt-out, fully pivoting screen, which is new for me. I've never had a Canon camera that had that or has it. This one does, obviously, and I like it so far. I like that you can actually stow it and completely protect the screen, right? That's nice. And then, of course, you can bring it out. You can flip it around if you're, you know, doing any kind of work on video or whatever, and you're by yourself, and you need to make sure that everything's you know, in the frame that needs to be in there. That's a nice feature. As far as, you know, you can bring it back and have it. I consider it kind of the standard way of doing things, with it facing out, so you can get at the menus and things like that. It's a touch screen, a lot like the 5D Mark IV, which this camera is kind of meant to replace, I guess, in a mirrorless form. And so you can touch all the menu items, make changes and everything just by touch, and I love that. I loved it on the 5D Mark IV. I love it on this camera, and it's implemented basically the same way. So. You know, as far as ergonomics, I really like it. I think it's a great camera as far as ergonomics go. So, 20 frames per second. Let's talk a little bit about, you know, the electronic shutter in here. There were two things that before I got the camera I was really kind of concerned about whether they would work for me. Right, the electronic viewfinder is one. The A9 II, the Sony A9 II, they made the leap, right? Sony did, to where you could shoot through an electronic viewfinder with no blackout, none, basically. And for someone like me who shoots fast action wildlife, especially birds in flight, to be able to track your subject through the viewfinder like that is absolutely important, you know, of utmost importance. And so the A9 and then the A9 II pretty much, you know, made that leap. So did Canon with this camera? Absolutely. No blackout, none, which is great. No lag in the viewfinder that I can see. Tracking things that are flying quickly is no problem whatsoever. You don't fall behind the bird because of any kind of electronic viewfinder lag. So I think, you know, in that sense, it's great. The other thing I was concerned about, electronic shutter, 20 frames per second, was rolling shutter effect, right? Sony, again, with the A9 and the A9 II, basically got rid of it. You can shoot fast-moving subjects like birds. An example I use, I shoot kingfishers every winter when they get here, and we're doing them diving, you know, down and back up. You know, it takes them less than a second to dive, hit the water, get a fish, hopefully come back up to the perch, right? And, you know, if you're going to get any kind of rolling shutter effect, shooting 20 frames per second on an electronic shutter, you're going to see it there. And on the A9 II, absolutely absent. It's not an issue. Canon R5, issue, non-issue. Little early to say. I haven't had a lot of time to shoot fast-moving flying birds, but I have shot some swallowtail kites, and all the images I've gotten so far show no rolling shutter effect whatsoever. I did some other flight shots this morning with things like ibis and stuff like that near my home, and again, they look beautiful. So I don't think there's really any rolling shutter effect that I can see at this point, but stay tuned. You know, we'll be obviously using the camera a lot more moving forward, and you know, we'll see what happens. But I'm cautiously, at least at this point, optimistic that Canon has done a great job in dealing with the rolling shutter on the electronic shutter. So you can always go to the mechanical shutter, right? 12 frames per second isn't bad, but I love the quiet, silent electronic shutter at 20 frames per second. And so if we can get that with no rolling shutter effect, we're in great shape. And so I'm really happy so far with those kinds of aspects of this camera. I think it's doing great. So, you know, like I said earlier, I put this old, you know, 400 5.6 on this camera, and you know, I always loved this lens because it's so sharp, you know, and so I've kept it all these years. I've not gotten rid of it, but it was never stabilized, right? There was no image stabilization in this lens, like I mentioned earlier as well. Well, now we've got IBIS in here, right? In-body image stabilization in the R5 for the first time. You know, Canon camera has image stabilization built into the body. 5 stops, I guess, all by itself. More if you combine it with a lens that has IS in it, especially the new RF lenses. Some of them will get you up to 8 stops of stabilization, which is just insane. But anyway, I wanted to see how it would do on an older lens like this with no stabilization, and I'll tell you what, it worked pretty darn well. I really was happy with the stabilization I got out of just the body itself, and so with that lens at 400 millimeters, and so it was really a pleasant surprise. And again, the images I took, which you'll see later in the video with this lens, are just stunning, you know, as far as sharpness and micro contrast and all that kind of stuff, and then stabilized with this camera and 45 megapixels, right? Just really happy with that. I shot, when I was shooting the swallowtail kites the other morning, I had my 600, like I said, along with a 600 and a 1.4 and a 600 with a 2 times. And the image quality coming off of that lens is always been amazing, and from this camera, it's still right up there, you know. And with 45 megapixels, now the detail that you can get in birds that are relatively close is just amazing. So as far as the speed of the autofocus, you know, the speed of the autofocus on here was really fast. This is an old lens, old technology in there as far as, you know, driving the elements of this lens for focus and things like that, but it was still really fast. On here, really fast with the 600, with the 1.4 and the 2 times, I didn't see any slowdown at all. Just like when I used to shoot my, you know, 1DX Mark II, you know, you really didn't see a whole lot of change. That's why you did that, right? That's why you shot a professional body if you needed it, because you just didn't see a whole lot of drop-off in performance when you started putting teleconverters and stuff on it. So it was really good. You know, this camera with those combinations on that 600 were really good, and so I can't complain whatsoever. Now I have a 100 to 500 RF that I'm hoping to get, but that's not going to be available until September. So I really don't have anything to compare to the speeds here with these lenses. That's, you know, the native RF mount at this point. I don't want to get something like a 70 to 200 or something like that, because I want the focal length, right? Compare kind of apples to apples if you can. So I want something that'll get out to 500 millimeters and something I can put a teleconverter on, and then I'll, you know, compare the speeds and the accuracy of the autofocus. But it's, you know, I just can't imagine it's going to be too much better than what I have right here, and that says a lot for people that are thinking about getting the R5. I think you can take your older lenses that aren't even image stabilized, and you can go ahead and get image stabilization that's very effective, I think. At this point, that's what it seems. And you can also get really good quick autofocus out of some of these older lenses, it seems. So I think that's a great thing, obviously. So I'm really happy about that. So as far as ISO performance, again, I haven't had a whole lot of time. My base ISO for most of what I do, ever since I started shooting like a 1DX or 1DX2 and stuff like that years ago, has basically been ISO 800. I always wanted ISO 800 to be relatively clean, right? I don't crop a lot my images for the most part, but sometimes you have to, especially when you're shooting little dicky birds or something. You can only get so close, even with 840 millimeters or something like that. They're still going to be relatively small in the frame. So that's where 45 megapixels comes in handy. But as far as the cleanness of 800 ISO on this camera, it's clean. It is really, really nice, even at 45 megapixels, right? 45 megapixels and ISO 800 I think is as good as the 1DX2 was, at least. I haven't gone much higher than that. I had a couple shots at 1200 or 1250 ISO, I think. And again, I didn't notice any noise to speak of that that caught my eye. And believe me, if things get noisy in my images, it catches my eye and I can see it. So I'm gonna have to play around more with ISO. And later in the video, if I get a chance, I'll add in some images of different ISO settings, to basically starting at 800 and going up to maybe 10,000 or something like that. I'll never see myself shooting higher than 10,000 even, right? Sometimes 8,000. I've pushed the envelope, I guess, for myself in the past to 8,000. But see if I have time, I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll put some of those in the video, and you can take a look for yourself at the noise associated with those ISO settings. I guess really the thing that I want to kind of end this short video on is the autofocus performance. And there's some footage in here that I recorded on an external recorder showing you how the autofocus on this camera performs. And the thing that I really was intrigued with this camera when they started talking about it was the same thing that I was intrigued with the Sony cameras like the A9 and the A9 II, was animal autofocus, right? Or animal eye autofocus even. So you can set this camera to basically an animal setting in the menu for autofocus, and then either just leave it there or actually turn on animal eye autofocus. And so I did that, right? I turned on the animal, I chose animal in here and not people, human, and I turned on eye detection, and tracking comes along with that. So I'm thinking, okay, this is, how's this going to perform compared to the Sony A9 II, which after a short test of that I turned off and have not used since then, because it gets fooled easily. And once it locks onto something, or once it thinks something is an eye, that's all it wants to focus on, right? And so that doesn't work, obviously. This camera, as you'll see from the footage, is different. It's better. I think overall, even after the short amount of time I've used the camera, the R5's autofocus system surpasses the A9 II's, especially the animal eye autofocus. It's amazing. I was shocked. I thought it was going to be gimmicky again and I was going to be turning it off. I'm not so sure. You can see the footage for yourself and make your own determination. I want to point out one thing. While you're watching that footage, realize that the lens I was using was this 400 5.6, okay? A 13-year-old lens, basically. So this is not a cutting-edge RF mount, 100 to 500 or anything like that, okay? It's an old 13-year-old 400 millimeter 5.6 non-stabilized lens. And when you see the the autofocus capabilities of this camera with that old lens, I wonder how much better it's going to be with RF mount lenses that are meant to communicate with this camera at the fastest speeds in the most accurate way. This lens is in no way tuned to this body per se. So, and it was still something that kind of blew my mind. Is it perfect? No. But does it do what you want it to do? In the little bit that I've used it, I think it does. If it It basically, if it can find the eye, it focuses on the eye and it tracks it and it pretty much keeps it. If it can't find the eye, it'll focus on the head. If it can't really find the head because of, you know, background or something like, it'll focus on the body of the bird, right, or of the animal. For me, it's birds. Everything you'll see in here are birds. And, you know, you really can't ask much more than that. Can it get fooled by backgrounds that are very close to the subject in distance, like directly behind it? Yes, it can, but I'll tell you what, from the little bit that I've used it, it's pretty amazing. And I'm not talking about the eyes of these birds being like big in the frame and right in your face. I purposely, as you'll see, chose birds swimming on the water and stuff like that, ducks, that were distant, right, that were distant. And so the eye is barely perceptible. You can barely see it. But yet, it'll grab the head and sometimes even the eye. And then when you did get a bird, and these were brown birds, brown heads, right, with dark eyes, not a lot of contrast there, and it still did a pretty good job. When you got a bird close up where the eye was big and there was contrast, like a black eye on a white face or a brown eye on a white face of a bird, I mean, good grief, it didn't even hesitate to find the eye and track it. So really, really impressed. I tried it on the swallowtail kites yesterday morning in flight, and it didn't really grab the eye, but good grief, the eye's so small, it grabbed the head most of the time, but like 90% plus, it grabbed the head of these birds in flight, right? So I'll tell you what, right now I'm really impressed. It may, you know, the amount that I'm impressed by this technology may diminish as time goes on, but right now I'm definitely leaving it on, and I'm going to give it all the chance in the world to continue to impress me, because wow, you know, what a technological leap forward for wildlife photography, really. And poor light, you know, cheap, you know, older lenses and stuff like that, and it was working. It was working really, really well. Okay, another thing I'd like to mention is with the electronic shutter, you don't have any noise, right? That's one of the points. You can shoot completely silent, no shutter noise whatsoever. I guess obviously that's good, especially if you're like a wedding photographer and you're shooting in churches a lot or something like that, or you're a street photographer and you don't want people to know you're taking pictures and draw attention to yourself. And for wildlife it can be important too, like when I'm shooting kingfishers and stuff in the winter, a super skittish bird, we're really close, we're in a hide, and you start rattling off shots like a machine gun, you know, it can actually cause some issues. So that's fine, but a lot of times I like to hear the shutter going off, right? I mean, I grew up with the shutter noise from when I was a little kid with film cameras all the way on through, obviously, digital. And so, you know, for me, it's part of photography, so it being completely gone is kind of a bummer in a way for me. And with the Sonys, you can actually turn on, quote unquote, a fake shutter noise, right? So that when you're shooting, you can hear that you're shooting, even when you're in an electronic shutter. Well, you know, and the part of it being that it's nostalgic, you know, that you would like to hear yourself shooting, and that's part of photography is one thing, but you know, that actually has a functional purpose for me as well. And the functional purpose is that you know when you're shooting, right? You can hear it, and you know how fast you're shooting. If you're in one shot, it would just go click, right? If you're in 20 frames per second, continuous high frame rate shooting, it's going, and you can hear it going 20 frames per second per se. That's how the Sony cameras work. You can turn on this fake shutter noise. Well, you know what? The Canon R5, it doesn't have a fake shutter noise. It's just silent when you're on electronic shutter. So it's interesting. I can't tell, you know, when I'm pressing the shutter button, I can't tell what's happening. There's no blackout in the screen, so you can't tell what's happening. There's a flicker, there's a bar that comes on the top that flicks on and off at the rate that the camera's shooting, but unless you're paying attention to that, you don't even really see it. There's really no flicker in the viewfinder at all, and when you're paying attention to a fast flying bird, you don't even see it. So really, I don't know if I'm taking any images or not, or how fast it's taking images. And so if for some reason I made a mistake and said something weird to where it's one shot or, you know, 10 frames per second or something like that instead, you could tell that before by the sound of the shutter, or even the fake sound like we're talking about here, but now you can't. So for me, I really wish Canon would have put in a fake sound of a shutter to go along with the fully electronic shutter, because for me, I like it and sometimes it's a functional thing, like I just said. So I kind of wish they would have done that, because you can turn it on and off, right? If you don't need it, you don't want it for certain situations, you can turn it off. If you like it like I do, you can turn it on. So giving people options is always a good thing, and I really hope that maybe they could do something like that in a firmware update in the future, because I really like it. I like that as a part of the Sony cameras that I've been shooting. So I really hope that Canon might bring that along for those of us who like to hear their camera making some noise when they're in the field. Okay, so responsiveness of the electronic viewfinder, right? When you take your eye away from the camera, the viewfinder turns off, and that's fine. Needs to. Uses power, right? You don't want that thing burning up your batteries when you're not looking through the viewfinder. However, I've noticed that on the R5, if you have the screen of the camera pivoted around to where it's hidden and off, right? Like so, it's never on. It never comes on. Now it's only electronic viewfinder. And if you're shooting and you take it away from your face and it turns off, when you bring it back, there's a little bit of a delay when it comes back on. And if you're bringing your camera up quickly because there's a bird in flight coming, any delay, even a split second, can be a problem. And it will do that in this kind of a scenario when you have the screen hidden. If you bring it out and have it on, so now it'll switch automatically between the back and the front, and that's a menu setting that you can make, obviously. When you bring it up to your face now, when you bring it up to your eye now, it's almost instantaneous. That lag goes away for the most part. It's almost gone. And so that's just a little bit of something that I've figured out at this early stage of using this camera. For me, this is the way this camera is going to be set up when I'm out shooting, because that delay, when it's the other way around, is not a good thing for me. And so I'm going to keep it this way, and then basically the delay is negligible, and you know, the EVF comes on, and it's great. So, you know, as far as the EVF itself goes, as far as the resolution of the EVF, the brightness, the quality of the image you see through the EVF on this camera is amazing. It's as good as the A7R4 Sony. I think it's much better than the A9 II. And even though it's much higher resolution than the A9 II, the flicker or the delay or whatever you want to call it, the blackout, is non-existent basically. So they've done a great job with the refresh rate on that. There's some settings in the menus where you can change some things. One that's called smooth and things like that. You'll see when you go into the menus, and I'll do a video hopefully really soon going through the menu system of the camera. I didn't want to put all that into this video, but you can set up the EVF on this camera to where it is gorgeous. It really is. What you see through the viewfinder you can change, like on most of these mirrorless cameras, or basically all of them. The information that's presented, where it is in the viewfinder, you can change a little bit as well. The one thing that I liked about the Sony cameras is you can see a histogram, right? A brightness histogram or an RGB histogram. You can change that. I always have it on brightness. And the position of that histogram on the Sony A9 II, for example, is in the lower right-hand corner of the viewfinder when you're looking through the camera. So when you're looking through the viewfinder, you see your scene or your bird or whatever you're photographing, and if the histogram is on, you really don't even see it. You have to make your eye look down to the bottom right before you see the histogram, and I like that. Well, on the R5, it's not like that. If you have the histogram on, if you go through the info button on the back when you're looking through the viewfinder and you hit the info button, it's like a toggle, a scroll. You can scroll through different views, and it'll bring up different pieces of information, and you can kind of pick the one you want. And that's somewhat customizable as well. But anyway, when you get to the one that has the histogram, the position of the histogram is in the upper right. But when I say upper, it's not like upper. It's almost like mid-right, and it's in the way. you can see it when you're trying to focus on your subject and get good images of your subject, and here's this histogram kind of sitting there, and I don't like it. And from what I can tell, you can't move the position of that histogram in the viewfinder. It's there. So what I'm doing now is toggling it on and off. I'll take a look at it if I want to look at it, and then I hit the info button again, and it goes away. But I really like to be able to keep it on sometimes. I don't meter a lot for what I do. We can talk about that in another video, how I shoot. But I do like to see histogram as kind of a relative gauge to how far on the dark side am I shooting, how far on the bright side am I shooting, or how, if I'm right in the middle or whatever. I don't need a lot of detail out of that histogram, but it's nice to be able to glance at it to make sure that something's not totally out of whack. But I don't want it sitting almost in the middle of the frame where it's, even though it's transparent per se, quote unquote, you can see through it. You still have to look through it, and it's distracting. At least it's distracting for me. So anyway, maybe they can change, maybe Canon can change that, because I like getting it down in the bottom right-hand corner or whatever, out of the way, to where you're not noticing it when you're shooting would be awesome. So hey, thanks for joining me, and I hope you found at least some of the content of this video informative. And if you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I hope to be putting up a new video every week or so. And if you want to get notified automatically when I put up a new video, please just click on the bell, and you'll get those notifications sent directly to you. So thanks again, and see you soon.